Hello, we're going to be talking about part 2, or the second part of figuring an occupant load. So I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit how to figure formulas so that we can go from there. Okay, figuring occupant loads part 2. You've read over the general information on chapter 10 in your IBC code book. Hopefully you found out where you see the formula, and we'll go back over that again. I'll answer some questions. And you've looked at the table 104.1.2. Now, remember we had said the formula can be used two different ways, and we know our formula is occupant load equals floor area divided by occupant factor. The occupant factor is always found in table 104.1.2. So the two ways is determine the required area in square feet for a particular occupancy, or determine the occupancy size allowed in a building. So we looked at our particular chart. Hopefully you've taken time to create your chart so that you could be able to plug things in the future. So sometimes you might say, I want to modify my occupant load. So some cases may allow to increase the occupant load of a space, providing increased additional exiting. Exiting means means of egress to get out. Of course, you have to have code of official approval for that. And then if you'll notice in your code book, it says right in through here, I'll make sure we get close enough. It says increase occupant load. Now the occupant load permitted in any building or portion thereof is permitted to increase from that number increased for the occupancies in table 104.1.2, provided that all other requirements of the codes are met based on such modified number and the occupant load does not exceed 1 occupant per 7 square feet. Okay? Where required by the building official, an approved aisle, seating, or fixed equipment diagram sustainable may increase in occupant load shall be submitted. Where required by the building official, some diagram shall be posted. Okay. Why do they do that? Sometimes they want to increase the number, take all the chairs out, increase the number there. So there's ways of doing this. So let's say we have 5,000 square feet by 15 net. That equals 333, but you want to add 400. What do? Of course, that's going back and looking at, we can increase it 7 net up to that. So we could take our 5,000 square feet, right? And you divide it by 7 net. How many more could you get in that space? Oh, my gosh, that's a huge number that if I look at it. So if I go back and I multiply that, go to my handy calculator here, it comes up to 714. Well, I don't know that I need to increase it that much, but I do want to increase it a little bit more. So in doing so, it allows me to do that. But it says that I have to make sure that I have the right number of exits. I have to get it approved by my jurisdiction, and I've got to make sure that I have the adequate spacing necessary. So those are things that you need to be able to look at. Now, something else, if you've read this chapter, I would like to point out, areas without fixed seat or areas with fixed seats. Sometimes you hear the term fixed seat. So in a McDonald's where they have everything is fixed seat, how do you determine the occupant load? That means if I have 45 fixed seats mean things that are bolted to the floor, okay? And it tells you here, fixed seating, okay? For areas having fixed seats and aisles, the occupant load shall be determined by the number of fixed seats installed therein. The occupant load for areas in which fixed seats is not installed, such as waiting areas, shall be determined in accordance with section 104.1, which is our table here, and added to the number of fixed seats. So it also says the occupant load of wheelchair spaces and the associated companion sheet shall be based on the occupant for each wheelchair space and one occupant for the associated companion seat, providing concordance with the section 1108. So for areas having fixed seats without divided arms, so let's say we have a bench, the occupant load shall not be less than the number of seats based on one person per 18 inches of seating length. So if we had a bench that was 4 foot long, okay, take out that little handy calculator, and it was 4 foot long, that would be, of course, meaning that it's 48 inches divided by 18 equals 2.6. Well, you can't have a sixth of a person, so that means 2 people can sit on a 48-inch bench. So we have that 48-inch bench, and 2 people can sit. That's required. So if you have an individual seat, then like in a McDonald's you may have some booths and you may have individual seats, then you're going to count how many seats are in there, and that's our number, occupant load number. Okay, reduced number is always desirable for space. An example, a storeroom may not typically be occupied, so you might want it designated so it may be out of the equation. However, when approved by official, it has to be justified and can affect future use of the space. Occupant load for primary and secondary spaces. One or more smaller spaces exist into larger or primary spaces for reaching, of course, the area. Let's look in your textbook, because I'm sure you all read in your textbook. And let me back this up. I want to make sure that you saw this. Okay? This is on page 106. And when you saw it, you saw that this office doesn't have an exit. There's no doorway leading to the outside. So these people have to go in here in order to be able to get out. All of these offices do not. So they all have to go here. All this space, they come in here, which is the break room. So what you end up having to do is you've got to figure your occupant load for each of those. You figure your occupant load here, but all of those have to be added to this particular space because they may all be in this space and they're all trying to get out of these 2 exit ways. So you have to calculate that way. Okay? Okay, when there's 2 or more occupancies occur in the same buildings, let's say we have hotels, which is residential, but it has a restaurant, which could be assembly or business, and it had ballrooms. And so looking at that, the ballroom could be assembly or business, but more than likely it would be assembly. And the office building, of course, may be just business, but there may be a daycare center in it, so it could be educational, institutional, depending on how many. So you can see there's a lot of times different spaces or occupancies within one type, like hotel or office building or a hospital. Hospital may have your rooms, which are institutional, but we have a cafeteria, which is an assembly, or there could be an auditorium in there, which may be assembly. So we have to look if there's more than one type of occupancy within that space. So that may be referred to as mixed or multiple occupancy. We talked about incidental use already, but previously certain uses within a building determine the hazardous when they exist. They are called incidental use. Now referred to in the IBC code book, hazardous areas. Now, any hazardous area cannot exceed 10% of the building area of the floor on which it's located. So you can read that in section 509 in your book on page 102. So if we go back here to page 102, and I will move this over to incidental area. It says incidental use located with a single occupancy or mixed building shall comply with the provision of this section. Incidental uses is ancillary functions associated with a given occupancy that generally pose a risk level to that occupancy or limited to those used in the table. So when you're looking at this, you've got to make sure, and it says area limitations when I told you the 10%. Incidental uses shall not occupy more than 10% of the building area of the story in which they are located. So what we've got to do here is the building have to be sprinkled, not sprinkled, buildings not equipped without an automatic sprinkler or no separation are not permitted. So if it's over that 10%, then you have to look at this particular table, which is 508.1. So if we had an assembly and we had a residential area within it, okay, an apartment within a theater, that means that you would end up having to have a separation there, okay? So 1 hour separation. So you need to be able to look at that. You've got to look over here if we had a residence and another residence area, two residences next to each other, there doesn't have to be no separation with the end, okay? If it ended up being an assembly and a hazardous one, it's not permitted. So that's how you kind of look and see how you make the divisions. We're going to get into later on what those wall assemblies have to be. So it may take it just a little bit understanding. So I just kind of wanted to bring that out to you. Okay, accessory occupancies, 2 or more occupancies in a building, but one or more is much smaller than the other. 10% of the total area. Remember, we looked at this earlier a little bit, and we kind of determined, if you looked in your text on page 88, you could see figure 2.1, and on page 90, it kind of showed you those examples. So just kind of be familiar with that again. Occupant load for more than one occupancy. More than one occupancy in the same space or 2 occupancies that share the same floor, the occupant load for each must be determined separately. So you've got to figure them separately. When different occupancies share a common area like restrooms, exiting corridors, the total floor area needs to be determined. So if I have one area that is, I guess we could look at here in your textbook on page 108, might give you an example. So if I have an architectural firm, I'm going to figure their occupant load here. Then I'm going to figure the laundromat. Then I'm going to figure the clothing. And then I'm going to figure the copy shop. Each one of these have to be figured separately. And then we're going to add them together then to figure out how many doors, exit ways, how many stairs we have to be able to get out. They may share common areas like the restrooms and stuff, but we don't have to figure those because everybody should be in their appropriate spaces. Okay, to repeat, remember you're figuring each one separately, and then you'll add it together to figure out how many doors and exit ways you need to be able to get out of the building, or how wide our stairs have to be. So if two or more occupants in a building space are the same size, you have to look and see if there's any separation. Remember, of course, you can review the plans on page 92 in your textbook. You'll be able to see those here. Okay, they're the same size, no rated separation. We've got to go back and look at table 508 to see if there needs to be any rating. That means 1 hour, 30-minute rating to separate the two, or 2 hour separation. But when there's no rated separations, that's called non-separated. And if there is two different ones, you always have to go with the most restrictive. Each occupancy type must be calculated separately, so we need to look at it. And that's going to determine how many plumbing fixtures that we're going to be utilizing. So you can look back on page 108 in your textbook. This is where we're looking at, remember, figuring each one separate and then totaling them up. And that way when we total, we'll know how many plumbing fixtures, how many doorways we have to have, how wide our stairs have to be. Back to fixed seats. Remember, if we just kind of a repeat, if you've got that particular fixed seat, you count the number of seats. Counting the chairs is easy. Benches, remember, is 18 inches per person. Okay, I hope you've kind of read through this and understand this particular chapter. It's an important chapter, understanding this. So reread it, read it again, highlight it, and be ready if you have questions. And don't forget to do your worksheet. Talk to you later.